Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today. I'm just going to share screen. It's a real delight to be hosting a webinar today from the New Economy Network Australia, featuring Hamed Hosseini, talking about reimagining the good life, a pluriversal perspective of community wellbeing in Australia. So first, I'd like to acknowledge country. I'd like to acknowledge that I personally live, work and play on the traditional lands of the Kabi Kabi people. I'm here in Narangba, which is north of Brisbane, and the country that I live on, some of the view there, the beautiful Glasshouse Mountains, the country I live on also connects to the Jinnabara traditional custodians' land. So I'd like to acknowledge all the First Peoples of this continent and any Indigenous peoples joining us today. And I'd also like to acknowledge the important role that we all play in understanding the history of our place and hopefully playing a part in decolonising the way we think about Australia, the way we think about caring for country, and the way we think about our future role together as peoples living on this continent. Sorry, that's the map of where I live. And that's the map showing where I live using the Aboriginal map of Australia. Just want to acknowledge all the First Peoples of this continent and acknowledge that land was never ceded, that we still continue to live on stolen lands. What I'd like to do before I introduce Hamed's work is just tell you a little bit about the New Economy Network Australia, or NENA. NENA was created back in 2016, 2017 as a really fantastic network, a growing network of individuals and organisations who are keen to create an ecologically healthy and socially just society by focusing on Australia's economic system. So NENA is run entirely by volunteers, has a board of directors, it's registered as a cooperative, but we also have some really fantastic ways for people to get involved with NENA, including through our distributed governance network. So if you ever want to know more about how we work, in the About Us, you'll find a little bit about our governance and the fact that we have lots of different hubs that can connect people with their own diverse interests into the broader network. NENA's had a quiet year because of everyone being incredibly busy, but next year we're excited to be hosting the next New Economy Conference in Brisbane in 2025. It will be probably in the last few months of next year. We have yet to set a date and to lock in all those plans. But if you have a look on the website one day, please do check out the NENA Journal. There's a vast array of recorded events, webinars and things that we've hosted and lots of other information. And if you want to get involved or you want to become a member, please check out the website or send us an email. That would be fabulous. But what I wanted to do now was just mention that Hamed and myself worked together to create an MOU between Hamed's University and the New Economy Network Australia to carry out a range of research projects and activities. And so we're really excited to be having Hamed talk today about his research project, which continues, and his interests in looking at wellbeing continue too. So without further ado, I'm really excited to listen to Hamed's talk. Over to you, Hamed. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, for your very insightful introduction and for leading the session today, and of course hosting it. I'm also thrilled to see so many people actually here. So far, we have about 92 attendees, and I hope you will stay with us until the end. I have a lot to share, so without further ado, let's dive right in. Yeah, well, good afternoon, everyone. As Michelle mentioned, my name is Hamed Hosseini. I'm a sociologist working at the University of Newcastle, and speaking to you from the unceded Aboriginal lands of the Awabakal and Wormai peoples. I'm very thrilled to be here today to present the very first findings from a research project my academic team and I conducted in partnership with New Economy Network Australia, NENA, in 2021. The project was based on a kind of a nationwide social survey and 14 in-depth interviews with some civil societies, a sample of civil society and grassroots organizations across Australia. So all of them were kind of involved in progressive change. So our research focused mostly on their perception of a good life, alongside several other key topics, including their theories of change, their ideologies or ideological views, the scale and the scope and the lens of their work, their positions on critical topics or issues, and their goals and their functions, as well as the means they use to achieve those goals, and a number of other things. So I know we have a diverse group of attendees today, and I'm very aware that catering to everyone's preferences can be a little bit tricky. Some parts of the presentation might feel a little bit dense for some, and others might find those sections a little bit interesting or not interesting, or vice versa. So if one part doesn't grab your attention or interest, please don't worry. There's likely another coming up that will. For the activists, for instance, here there are political elements that might resonate. For students and learners, there is educational content, and for the fellow academics, well, don't worry, there is some theory too. So this may take about 60 minutes, I'm afraid to say, so I really appreciate your patience. So we'll finish with a Q&A at the end, and my colleagues well, keeping an eye on the chart, on the chat room for your questions and the comments. So I'll try to keep things clear and accessible, but I might miss a few finer details here and there. So this is the first time we're sharing the findings, and your thoughts will help us improve. And also very fitting that this is part of the Social Sciences Week, which is about making social sciences more engaging for the broader audience. So in that spirit, I'm stepping away from the usual academic, the boring academic format, to keep things a little bit more fresh and hopefully more engaging. Academic presentations usually start by going over the research details, objectives, methodologies, the context, etc., etc. But that's important, but I want to keep the focus on the core insights today. So here's a quick slide with the background of the project for anyone interested in the specifics, like the methodology or findings, etc., etc. I'll share links under the recorded session on YouTube for you to check out later. Here I only just want to give a very big thank you to everyone who made this possible. NENA as our community partner, the research team, more than 100 organizations or participants who took our survey and accepted our invitation for the interviews, and the College of Human and Social Futures at the University of Newcastle that funded the project. Okay, well, let's get straight to the heart of today's discussion. I want to start with a question that it'll get you thinking and help focus the topics. The question is this: how would you, or how would we, define a good life for our local community, for a society where us, our communities, and many interconnected communities coexist? Or in other words, what are the essential elements that make up a good quality of life for everyone, your neighbors, families, businesses, schools, even natural environment that supports it all. So we don't have, unfortunately, time for a full discussion here, I'm afraid, but let's consider the kinds of answers we might expect to hear when we raise such a question, right? So many would mention tangible things that would improve overall community well-being, like wealth, I don't know, economic growth, or good public services, prosperity, jobs, political participation, maybe, and a healthy environment. Others might highlight more subjective elements like satisfaction, happiness, mental well-being, or even spiritual fulfillment, peaceful coexistence, or dignity. And these are harder to measure, but just as vital in shaping our idea of a good life. But if you think about it, these elements that I just mentioned are the same ones we often see in official social indexes, like, the Human Development Index, OECD, Better Life Index, or happiness rankings, and the like. And they focus on the availability of material and non-material conditions at an acceptable standard or level. But here's the thing. I mean, these indexes measure the outcomes, not how a society actually gets there or achieves them. So they focus on what people and communities have or want to have, but not about how they achieve it, and not the process behind it. So here is a more critical question I think we need to raise, and that is, what enables a society to achieve these conditions of good life in a way that is effective, sustainable, and moral? And how does a society not just accumulate wealth or even happiness, but create a system where these conditions are equitable and enduring? So, I mean, this kind of question actually shifts our focus from the what question to a how question, or even to a why question, why we think this is good for a society. So the answers to the second question, how we achieve and sustain conditions of good life, are going to be very different to the answers to the first question. So it is no longer just about wealth or happiness as the end products, but about the processes that lead to them, and importantly, the legitimacy of those processes. Let me clarify. Imagine a country with high income, strong economic growth, a high standard of living, healthcare, education, leisure for many. Well, on the surface, it looks great, but dig deeper, and you find much of this wealth relies on unequal relationships with poorer countries, through unfair trade, cheap resource extraction and low-wage labor. I mean, that scenario is not really alien to us. We're very familiar with that. So yes, many in that country or society enjoy a good life, but inequality between classes also, or genders and ethnic groups, even within that society, are growing, and people are disconnected from how value is created, and that would lead to growingly the sense of powerlessness and resentment and disenfranchisement. So, well, this good life has two major problems, obviously. First, it's ethically shaky because it's built on exploiting marginalized groups, both abroad and at home. And usually the same systems that drive inequality overseas are the same as the ones that drive inequality inside. And a second problem is that it's unsustainable. I mean, for very obvious reason, that rising inequality undermines justice, and infinitely pushing for economic growth, really depletes resources and causes environmental destructions and finally worsens the climate crisis. So that's why a more important question than what constitutes a good life is what enables a society to secure a good life in ways that are morally right and balanced, both socially and ecologically. And this was the very big question we asked ourselves in 2020. I mean, the timing was really a key. COVID-19 hit, turning the world upside down, forcing us to think seriously about the future, not just for humans, but for all life on the planet. And meanwhile, I mean, climate change had been worsening for years, hitting different regions unevenly. And life as we know it has never been under such an assault, under such pressure from so many directions. So of course we're not the first group to ask this. It's been debated maybe for centuries in terms of what results in good life, and many of us are still figuring it out, trying to build a better life. And we also know that the economic policies and political decisions are shaped by different ideas of the good life. So we shouldn't really underestimate such ideas. If a society values, let's say, individual prosperity and freedom of choice, when its policies will favor market and personal liberty. If the focus is on social justice, then there will be more emphasis on redistribution, welfare, collective well-being. And as we know, these approaches, policy approaches, are always shaped by power and are constantly pulling in different directions. Now, there has always been a struggle over what a good life means and how to achieve it. And after 2008 global financial crisis, some movements regained momentum to push beyond GDP by taking account of social equity and ecological well-being. And some have been working through projects, their own projects, and social innovation, and others focus on education and policy influences. With so many approaches out there, it's essential, we felt, that to map and understand how their perspectives converge or diverge. For a long time, I would say the elite, the establishments, if you like, with control over media, education, and think tanks, they have shaped the narratives around good life. Everyday people, despite having rich experiences and ideas, often go unheard. I mean, they actually lack the necessary platforms, time, and resources to develop and express their views. So this is where grassroots and civil society actors and movements come in. On the one hand, they're connected to their communities, and on the other hand, they engage with the elite institutions to promote their new ideas of progress. So, but they are often also underfunded and underheard, and they normally struggle to push their ideas forward. So this is why a project like this that maps and amplifies views to themselves and to the public could be so powerful. I mean, it can connect fragmented perspectives, it can strengthen their collective voice, and it can highlight the alternative visions they fight for. So it helps them articulate their own ideas and learn from each other. So with this in mind, we saw the civil society actors and grassroots activists as a perfect group to help us map perspectives on a good life, and we invited over 500 potential respondents from progressive groups across Australia. And our goal was to dig deeper into how they see the good life and the processes they believe would lead to it. So, but due to COVID-19 lockdowns in 2021, we got responses from 106 participants, and after filtering the incomplete submissions, we had a final data set of 96 respondents, measuring 359 variables to analyze. So now I know 96 might not sound like a lot, but it gave us valuable insight, especially for a pilot study like this. And our aim was to test the methodology, not get a fully representative sample. But this data was still useful and sufficient for a scaling up. So when selecting the organizations, we focus on progressive civil society groups that push for, I would say, systemic change. And we checked their websites and used our team's knowledge to see if they were actively engaged in areas that are aligned with our goals. So we targeted groups that focused on ecological health, making it better, public well-being, social justice, so those working to protect the environment, improve community welfare, reduce inequality, advocate for marginalized groups. We also included those working to make the economy more participatory by promoting cooperatives or being a cooperative, community wealth building or social enterprises, and those advocating for economic redistribution. So, and finally, we included groups that were kind of committed to the decolonization and indigenous well-being. So these were the kind of criteria we used in order to select our sample and invite people and include them in the sample. So just to give you an overview that who finally took part, well, the pie graph on the right-hand side shows the percentages of the respondents based on their the ultimate outcomes they were aiming for. And the bar graph on the left-hand side shows the main roles they see themselves playing in their performance. So, for example, 9% of them listed decolonization as their top outcome. And, as you can see in that pie graph, and 27% are focused on ecological health and so on and so forth. On the left-hand side, the top bar, for instance, represents the percentage of the respondents focused on network and community building, which makes up the largest portion. This is followed by those who serve as service providers, the second top bar. A smaller portion focused on policy influence, and the rest are engaged in discourse or knowledge making as their primary function. But here is where it gets a little bit tricky. Many of the respondents picked up more than one option for their goals and functions. So that's why when you add up those percentages, it goes above 100%. And the thing is that basic pie charts or bar charts like these just can't really capture that complexity when people are given the choice to take more than one option. So these graphs don't really show which organization picked which answers and how their answers actually overlap. That's where social network analysis and visualization can really help. So many people think social network analysis is just for mapping actually existing physical connections between groups or individuals, but that's not the case. I mean, there are many interesting ways of making good use of them. So, for example, I used Kumu's, it's a website, interactive based platform to map out the organizations we surveyed, and it gives us a much clearer picture of how their goals and functions are shared or you may say connected. So here's an image of that that website. It's not interactive here, unfortunately. This is just an image and a screenshot. So in this case, we've got, as you can see, in that visualization, network visualization, we've got two types of nodes. The little circles, they represent the organizations themselves, and then names are written below each one of those dots or nodes. And also you see the type of the nodes that are the second type of the nodes that are larger, in the purple ones or the blue ones, the larger ones in the middle, that they show the ultimate outcomes these organizations are working towards. So the size of each circle, the purple circles, corresponds to the number of respondents that pick that outcome. So the larger the purple circle is, the more organizations pursue that. They are connected to it. The more organizations are connected or pursue that. And what's really cool is that that you can actually click on any node, whether organizations or the output, and to see not only what each organization is aiming for, but also how they align with other organizations that have the similar goals. So the nodes have some extra features. As you can see, their shape, if that's a circle or a square or a pentagon or whatever, their shape shows their geographical scope, and the color-coded rings around them highlights what type of explicit positions they have indoors. So on the left-hand side of the map, under the legend, you can see the list of colors and shapes and their related descriptions or qualities. So there are also buttons down there that by clicking on them, you can filter the view, so you can easily zoom in on some specific groups. For instance, you only want to see the co-ops or the peer-to-peer initiatives. So for instance, as in this image, we search for an organization like NENA. So I search for NENA, and it shows up, and then you click on it, and you can actually isolate it from the rest of the network and see what goals it pursues. And in this case, you see that there are 4 goals, and what explicit positions it endorses, according to those colorful rings around it, and what geographical scope and what type of organization it is, or what geographical scope it has, and what type of organization it is. In this case, it's a pentagon, and according to the legend, it means that NENA's geographical scope is national. So similarly, we can click on any one of those purple circles, the pursued outcomes or the ultimate outcomes or outputs. For instance, I clicked on decolonization, and I took an image of that, and you can see it is now isolated from the rest of the network, so you can clearly see what organizations pursue that goal, and that's the organizations that are connected to that goal or that node. So once we share the link in the chat room, and I really encourage you all, especially those of you who took the survey, to later on, after the session, explore the network. As I said, you can search for your own organization or any organization you're interested, and see which other organizations share your goals, strategies, and functions. And it's really cool once you start playing around with it, and I think you will find it super useful. If you find enough time, I will quickly show you how it works, after the Q&A, if we find enough time. But there's many more of such maps for many different purposes, and we share the links to them below the YouTube recording of the webinar, hopefully. Well, now you might rightfully ask, how we explored our respondents' perception of good life, which was the primary focus of this project. And our aim was to give more visibility to their views and help their voices be heard and gather insights that can actually inform policy, practice, and politics. At the core of our survey was something many of you might have seen before, even if you don't know the name. The name is the Likert scale, not Likert, the Likert scale, and it's a way to measure people's views on complex issues, by asking them to rate their agreement or disagreement with a number of statements. And why do we use such scales in social sciences, you may ask? Because social issues are very multidimensional, and one question normally can't capture the full picture. And take the example of job satisfaction, right? So you wouldn't just ask them, are you happy with your job? Jobs have multiple aspects, many aspects into them: the pay, the workload, the management, the relationship. So we normally ask multiple questions for a more complete view. So when it comes to something as complex as processes behind a good life and people's perception of that, it even gets more challenging. So it's not just about income or resources, but also about communities, and how communities organize, or foster well-being and promote freedom, and etc., etc. So in our survey, we use multiple statements, to be accurate, 22 statements, to explore how our transformative civil society participants see the pathways to a truly good life. So each statement captured a different piece, whether it was economic, social, political, ecological, and to give us a much clearer picture of what people value most and what they see as key to creating a thriving and just society. So, for instance, in this image, as you can see, we have given our respondents a range of statements about quality of life, and they were asked to indicate how important each of these 22 items or statements should be in defining quality of life or good quality of life of communities. And the options range from for each statement range from extremely important to not important at all. And then depending on the options the respondents choose, or every respondent chooses for each statement, they get a score from 1 to 5. 1 for not at all important, and 5 for extremely important. And then the more people think of a statement as more important, the higher the score is going to be for that statement. So there is unfortunately not enough space here to show you all the statements, but you will find them later in some slides in full. So this kind of a structure that we call scale helps us to actually capture the varying degrees of emphasis respondents placed on each factor or aspect, by providing insight into the collective priorities and visions for a good life. Now, you may ask me, where do the statements actually come from? As I mentioned earlier, when it comes to designing such scales, we partly or even sometimes primarily rely on existing literature. And often we also consult with our partners and discuss our options with other experts and co-develop such scales with a group of potential participants, and then pilot them and then refine them for the final use. So with respect to the literature as the source of insight for designing the statements in that kind of a scale, there is no shortage of well-articulated ideas. Philosophers, theologians, and thinkers from all corners of the world from ancient Greece to the Middle East and through European and Islamic medieval thought, they all have debated this for centuries. And the conversation then significantly shifted during the so-called European Enlightenment. And that's what eventually led to modern ways of evaluating quality of life today. So for me, mapping out these perspectives has been fascinating in recent years, especially since 2016. But I wanted to push it further. And in my open access paper, you can see an image of that on the screen. The well-living paradigm was the title of the paper published in 2023 last year. I dug into these historical ideas and took them in a new and more radical direction. And if you're curious, I'd recommend checking it out for deeper look at what I call a communist perspective on what a good communal life really looks like. So if interested, there is also a handbook like this one. This is not written by me, that it can even give you a much more detailed description of those ideological and philosophical arguments around the topic. So I won't get too deep, but it's worth mentioning a few traditions, intellectual traditions, that still shape how people think about the good life, and which we also, as I will show you later, we found being reflected in the responses that we received from our respondents. So first, there is a tradition called eudaimonia, or virtue ethics, which is about achieving good life by cultivating virtues like wisdom, courage, justice. And thinkers like Aristotle and the Stoics believed happiness comes from developing characters and living according to reason, with a focus on, I would say, moral growth and contributing to the community, or even looking after the environment. So then there is a hedonistic tradition, or hedonism, which is about maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain, but through simple, moderate pleasures that bring peace of mind, because they realize too much pleasure would be problematic. So we also have pre-modern communitarian cultures and religious traditions, where the good life is tied to communal solidarity and following moral or divine laws. And it's a mixed approach. Some traditions are more authoritative, while others, like Sufism, or you could say Sufisms, or Buddhisms, or indigenous cultures, they will emphasize balance. In many indigenous cultures, the good life is ideally about living in harmony with nature and the community, guided by, I would say, a spiritual and ancestral wisdom, embedded in their rituals. And individuals' well-being is seen as inseparable from the well-being of the community and the environment. Then we've got the European Enlightenment, that brought a major shift by focusing on secular and rationalist ideas, by framing a good life around individual rights and social contracts. For example, Thomas Hobbes argued the individuals should surrender certain freedoms to a powerful sovereign in exchange for protection and order. Without this kind of agreement, he said, life would be nasty, brutish, and short. And then opposite to him is another philosopher of enlightenment, the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. It saw humans as naturally good. He was kind of more optimistic and believed society should reflect the collective will and allow individuals to flourish. And for Rousseau, the good life came through democratic participation and shaping the rules to benefit the common good. Now, in the modern era, the idea of good life became more closely linked to economic success and individual achievement, especially under capitalist and neoliberal frameworks, liberal hedonism and utilitarianism focus on maximizing happiness or pleasure for the greatest number of people, and thinkers like Bentham and Mill argued that pleasure, especially intellectual pleasure, could be measured and boosted through rational policies and through markets. And then we've got neoliberal capitalism in recent decades that takes a much more reductionist approach by conflating the good life with economic growth, consumerism, and personal responsibility. You may remember Tony Abbott saying homelessness is a personal choice. And success here is measured by how well you compete in the market and achieve financial independence. Well, this view pushes for free markets and minimal state involvement, but it often ignores the social and ecological cost, which leads to rising, of course, inequality and environmental damage and climate change. So in response to neoliberal reductionism, we also have seen the rise of, especially more recently, reformist voices or approaches that redefine good life by including social and environmental concerns. For example, the Beyond GDP movement or well-being economy perspectives all argue that quality of life should reflect social equity, environmental sustainability, and overall well-being, and not just GDP. But such perspectives broaden their idea of well-being, but they often fail to challenge the core capitalist structures that shape the society. So besides them, we also have more radical voices. More recently, again, we've got movements like eco-socialism, ecofeminism, eco-anarchism, indigenous movements in the global south, even the Black Lives Matter movement in the global north. They have inspired new ideas about good life, and their visions of alternative futures are grounded in systemic criticism and the analysis of the status quo, rather than just surface level reforms or simply following what Marx and Engels diagnosed or critiqued as utopian socialism. So in my works, the well-living paradigm that I introduced earlier to you, the paper, and also this book, Capital Redefined, with my friend Professor Gills, I've captured the essence of these movements to build a common theoretical foundation known as the communist framework, which is a framework that unifies the diverse approaches, especially the radical ones, and offer a vision of the good life that moves beyond capitalism. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go into the details of that, but I wish to invite those of you who are interested to have a look at that. Both the paper and the book are open access, and they are available online. So, all right, let's get into the data we gathered using the so-called Likert scale. And in this bar chart, you can see the 22 statements listed on the left-hand side of the graph or the image, and the length of each blue bar against each statement shows how much emphasis our respondents have placed on each statement. Instead of agreeing or disagreeing, as you may remember, they were asked to rate how important each statement was to their idea of good life. So there's a statistical test called one sample t-test, mouthful, but we use that to compare each statement's average score to the middle of the scale that signifies a moderate position on each statement. So the blue bars on the right of the zero scale in the middle of the scale. So the blue bars on the right hand side of the scale show the higher level of importance that is placed on each statement. So the further right the blue bar is, the more strongly the respondents emphasized it. Bars on the left of zero or the middle show that respondents place little to no importance on those statements. So we see a strong emphasis on things like biodiversity, the very top one, as you can see, community solidarity, the connection to nature, and those bars stretch well to the right. On the other hand, down the bottom, you see the statements related to citizen compliance with the laws and traditions. Economic growth and competitiveness are shown leaning to the left, which means that respondents found this much less important. Okay, but even with all this data, it's still very tricky to see how these views reflect or challenge historical ideas about good life. So the real challenge is to overcome the complexity and to find patterns that underpin these responses. Now, as you can see, that was too many statements, and it's you know it's full of information, but it's hard to work with that, and that's why especially we researchers, and especially in social statistics, we try to find the patterns that that is behind them. So we fortunately we have methods like factor analysis, and I'll explain to you in simplest way possible, that group those answers together. For instance, the ones that correlate with each other, and then they group them under a single theme, and then we can find the patterns behind these answers. So yes, so we used a program, a software program, a computer program called SPSS to analyze the data. And it's very commonly used in social sciences. But what is interesting is the results we found line up with some of the big ideas that I just mentioned before, those, you know, intellectual traditions. And this shows how deeply these ways of thinking about quality of life are actually embedded across different groups. But it's more to that. It's not just those ideas influencing us today. So how does factor analysis work? I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It looks at for patterns in how people responded to our 22 statements. When people's answers to different questions tend to move together, it's because they are tied to the same underlying idea. So for example, if someone is strong, or if a good group of people, a good number of people strongly agree with, I would say, statements like community solidarity and collective ownership, you know, the analysis might group those under something that, because I just saw community solidarity, collective ownership, that it's, you see, this is a little bit subjective. We can group them, the analysis groups them under one category and leaves this to us to subjectively name it, you know, put a label on it. We would perhaps call that category or theme collectivist or communalist perspective. And this way we actually reveal the connections and patterns. So let's dive into this. Now, let me first show you this very scary tables. These are the results of factor analysis. I'm not going to explain them to you because it's a little bit too heavy and too complex for those of us that are not very familiar with the statistics. But you can see those numbers against the statements and those columns. Those columns are the 5 dimensions. So the software, the computer program found 5 dimensions that underpin 22 statements. Now, instead of dealing with 22 statements, we're dealing with 5 dimensions that underpin that. So I turn that to this colorful, again, bar chart. Down the bottom, you see those, you know, and it's color coded. Down the bottom, for instance, you see blue bars, and the blue bars are the ones that the computer put together as just one category or component number 1. And what statements you see in there, greater attention to play and creativity, greater opportunities for families and community, emphasis on cultural stewardship, greater emphasis on living together, etc., etc. And then you read them and you feel that, okay, what is the common theme that connects this number of statements that the computer put together, and Hamed colored them blue. And then the second component is the orange one. The top of that, you've got the green one, only 3 statements in there, and then the light blue ones, and then the purple ones. So let me go through each one of them and explain to you what we ended up, naming them. The first component, if you look at them, and this is subject to conversation among researchers and also their community partners and even activists. So I would perhaps we can call that descriptively. It seems that they point to kind of an ecocentric, but also communal well-being. So that first category, that first component that underpins people's view about quality of life, draws on ecocentric traditions, emphasizes on connection to nature. It's influenced by communalist ideas and focusing on, I would say, group well-being and living together. Then component number 2, the orange ones, I would perhaps call them egalitarian. And we're very much emphasis on social justice here and representation. Then you've got component number 3, the green ones together. When you look at them, it's more about, as you can see, you can read those statements, hopefully. It's about individual satisfaction, personal freedom or choice, and then something like that. It ties liberal traditions and that value personal autonomy, I would say, and rejects. It's kind of utilitarian, but it's not orthodox utilitarian. You see that people have valued personal freedom, but they're not happy to impose a one-size-fits-all way of delivering happiness for greater number. So it's a kind of I would say, less orthodox, unorthodox utilitarianism, which is kind of being endorsed here. And then component number 4, I would say the light blue bars and their statements. It's more about collective ownership, community solidarity and community or collective autonomy, and it's shaped by communalist autonomous ideas. I would say maybe a little bit anarchist here, and collective control over resources and solidarity, but also connects to socialistic ideas like worker ownership and economic democracy. And then component number 5, which is the least favored, as I will show you later, reflects the critique of the, mostly because it's not very much indoors, I would say, instead of saying showing people's endorsement, I would say it's a critique of traditional capitalist values like growth and competitiveness. This economic growth and competitiveness was not very much favored by the cohort of respondents, and it's very obvious because we mostly targeted the progressive ones, but there's also still some elements of that in their views. I'll get back to this. So yes, these are the 5 components that I just talked about them. Then you may ask me, well, how popular each one of those components, each one of those themes or dimensions are among the people. How much they are autonomous, how much they are communalist, how much they are ecocentric, how much they are pro-growth or against growth. Well, we have things like, these histograms or graphs that you can see. For instance, the more bars, the blue bars, are clustered on the right-hand side of the graph, the more that perspective or that dimension is favored. So the most favored one, as you can see here, is the most popular one, is that respondents really valued connecting with nature, protecting the environment, living in harmony with their communities, sustainability, and a shared and communal life as essential. They saw them as essential for good life. So this is the most favored. Followed by that, the second most favored, I would say, is the egalitarian one. And a strong support here. People believe in good life includes including social equality, fair political representation, access to social welfare, especially for marginalized groups, social justice, etc., etc. And then you've got the third one, again, not as favored as the first and the second one, not as popular, but it's still kind of, see that the bars are clustered in the middle, a kind of a moderate support for that. And what is that? It's individual satisfaction and personal freedom, but these values are not that dominant, and many see personal freedom or autonomy as something that should go hand in hand with collective well-being. And then the fourth one, again, this one is also very popular, and then there is a strong belief in this one. This is collective ownership and community solidarity, working together. Many respondents felt that a good life means shared resources and community solidarity, and they favored grassroots approaches. So this is the level of popularity of that dimension. And then finally, the least favored dimension, which is the traditional ideas of economic growth and competition, as I said, the least popular. So most respondents really don't prioritize growth and competitiveness as part of good life. Instead, they look towards something more than that. So what do these results tell us? Well, in just very nutshell, and just very short paragraph, when we look at all these components together, it's clear that communal, ecological, egalitarian values are the most popular. People in these groups generally favor ideas like working together, taking care of the environment, ensuring social justice for all. On the other hand, as I said before, individual satisfaction, economic growth are less important. And personal freedom matters, but it's not central as collective well-being. And finally, traditional ideas about growth and competition don't have much support. They are there, but they're not that favored. Now, okay, we might have also realized there is a bit of a hybridity going on here, because as I said before, those 5 dimensions are components of their mentality, the collective mindset. So they all do exist together, despite differences and despite sometimes contradictions, for instance. The actors don't fit neatly into one category. The respondents show that the responses show that people aren't sticking to a single tradition. For example, someone focuses on environmental justice might also draw on, let's say, ecocentric traditions, but they could also recognize the need for social equality policies to support marginalized groups. After all, it's economic justice, right? So you get a mix where ideas like individual freedom and community solidarity are embraced by the same people and same group to different degrees. So instead of boxing this perspective into a strict categories, it's better to think of them as tendencies and leanings, something like that, and grasp the hybridity and fluidity. This one is a selfie of that collective imagination, that collective perspective that is shared across the group. Again, they're the 5 components, but I replaced them with different names here because I'm trying to emphasize the connection between them and those ideational or ideological or intellectual traditions. But again, as I said before, they are very much intertwined and supported to different degrees. So this is a radar graph. And as you can see, again, we've got those 5 components. This time I'm calling them tendencies. For instance, on the right-hand side, you see the most favored one because it's closer to the borders, it's closer to the periphery. It's the post-humanist perception of good life, which is around centered around ecological well-being and interconnectedness. Then the second favorite is the on the left-hand side, as you can see, autonomous perception of good life, which is focuses on local governance, self-determination, and communities controlling and owning their resources, etc., etc. Then the third one is the communalist perception down the bottom here on the left-hand side, about community solidarity and shared ownership. And then you've got the post-utilitarian one, which is on the top. I call it post-utilitarian, as I said before. It's a bit utilitarian, but not that much. It's not that orthodox. So, and then you've got the least favored one down the bottom right-hand side. It's the economistic perception of good life, which is least favored. And as you said, as you can see, it's way inside to the center. So it's not that huge. Now, let's step back and look at the bigger picture of what our findings reveal and how they connect to a more radical vision for transforming society. So the 5 key tendencies we identified all point together to a clear shift, I would say, away from, yes, growth focused and new liberal frameworks. But moving beyond growth is just the first step to really address today's holy crisis, as some people call it. We need to dig deeper and confront the capitalist structure that shapes our reality. So our findings show real counter and post-capitalist elements in the responses, but I'm not sure if they actually amount to something coherent. That's why we need to complement quantitative research with qualitative research. We need to sit together with those people, as many as possible, and we did that with 14. They were kind enough to accept our interviews, so participate in our interviews, and so to get deeper into their minds. It's and actions and practices and experiences. So quant normally scans the surface, but it scans a very large surface. And qualitative normally gets deep. It's not that vast or wide, but it's deep. So so there's a strong support for collective ownership, and that's something we can consider as kind of a post-capitalist. Worker empowerment was mentioned and endorsed by the people, favored by the people, and people want radical change in how resources and labor are managed. So this corresponds to kind of economic democracy, which is post-capitalist. Next is a big emphasis on ecological stewardship. So people are rejecting capitalist extractive nature, and that's good. And they favor regenerative economy. We also see a push for political and social justice, which demands more political power for marginalized groups, especially First Nation countries, indigenous, and it's about redistributing power and not just wealth. And that's great. That's interesting. And lastly, the capitalist growth model, which was, as I said before, least popular, and that's again, it's a kind of a rejection of capitalism, in the sense that capitalism is a system that its ultimate goal is profit, a profit motive. So there are those good and strong and solid elements of post-capitalism in that kind of mindscape that we searched or scanned. Okay, only I think two or three more slides, and I end the misery. So let's also reflect on the loopholes and gaps. What are the limitations? Here you see me that I'm actually going beyond the data a little bit, and I'm actually, I didn't have time to present the rest of the data and the findings. And also I'm getting a little bit subjective, which is okay as far as I'm transparent, I believe. So I would say civil society wise, we have made good progress toward post-growth, collective, and eco-friendly ideas of good life. And the idea is there, although it's very in contrast with what we see at the elite level. Individualism, personal satisfactions are still valued, which is okay, but it can sometimes conflict with collective vision. And if we're not careful, this can start to resemble new liberal ideas like consumerism. And it's important to show that individual and collective well-being can go hand in hand. I'll give you an example. Many people think that if everybody gets they roll up their sleeves and gets involved in doing something different, finally out of the market of this kind of market of great ideas, a new force would emerge. That sounds like the hidden hands of or the invisible hands of market, Adam Smith's invisible hands of market. That sounds like a little bit neoliberal. There needs to be a layer of meta activists like the honeybees that go and pollinate and cross-fertilize across different views. So the growth dilemma is still there, because by and large, the court has moved away from the growth narratives, with many seeing it as necessary, but not. So there's a bit of a division between those who say growth is not enough, so let's go for it, but also go for more than growth, so that green capitalism or green growth, and those who are degrowth. And that's one of those divisions. That's one of those gaps or chasms that we need to work on. Also, there's a number of respondents that seems that they have, it's only a small number of them that task themselves to decolonize. And interestingly, another part of the findings actually shows that those who go for decolonization, those who pursue decolonization, are the ones that are most likely take a more holistic view of good life. Oh, and I think that's the inspirations and insight they get from the indigenous, because that's how the indigenous people look at the world. They are very holistic. And there are also tensions between political representation and collective autonomy in the minds of people, etc., etc. I'll skip that. So it's important to also look at the limitations, loopholes, chasms, contradictions in that mindscape, in that collective mindset. Now, what are the implications for actions? Well, these findings actually show that a strong anti-capitalist, commons-based, and post-humanist values are there. But real transformation needs more than just hybrid ideas. We must build a unified understanding of how capitalism fuels our social and ecological crisis. After all, we're living under capitalism. And more than that, it's the unholy trinity of capitalism, modernism, or you may call it developmentalism, and imperialism / colonialism. So that unholy trinity, we need to actually deal with that. And shows, this data shows that many efforts are there to challenge capitalism, but the real challenge is how to unite them or bring them together, and in kind of a coordinated push. And change won't come from isolated pockets. It requires transformation of society's entire, I would say, value system. Collaboration across movements is crucial. Real progress happens when, I believe, social, ecological, and economic struggles unite. So we understand, I should acknowledge, we understand not everyone can fight on every front, and not everyone can share the same values, etc., etc. It's unrealistic to expect that. But the solution is for movements to work more in solidarity with one another and supporting and amplifying efforts across different causes. A specialization in activism is great, it's necessary, but coordination is also necessary. And that's why the works of organizations like NENA, the network weaving, running biannual conferences, bringing all those progressive forces and voices together to hear from each other, running workshops constantly and tirelessly is great. It is such efforts like NENA's effort should be supported. And I really invite you to get involved and to support as much as you can. And also we also need class consciousness and to be strengthened. Otherwise, we will give it up to the populists, to the far right, to take our working classes with them, with those old, those conspiracy theories, immigrants eating our pets. And ultimately, good life is about what society, at the end of the day, values. Everything boils down to value. And moving beyond GDP, as I said before, is not enough. We must redefine value itself and focus on true value, the one that nourishes our communities and ecosystems, rather than fetish value that is about extracting profit. And the goal is to embrace authentic ways of living. And here is my final slide, hopefully. Just let me end this presentation by sharing this a famous quote from the Marx and Engels, the Communist Manifesto. I believe many of you are familiar with that famous quote, but I have reconstructed it and reworked it in my recent books, Capital Redefined. And this is how it goes. So the history of all societies, past and future, is the story of two intertwined yet distinct struggles. The two struggles always happening at the same time. One between the value makers and value takers within the existing value system or regime, okay, fighting over the distribution of value. My wage is not that high, I want better working conditions, or fighting over recognitions, my identity, etc., etc., which is great. But that's just one struggle. The second struggle which is much deeper, more decisive battle, is over what should we truly value, what should truly constitute value, and the way of structuring the system that delivers that value. So that's the fight, that what we really need to value. We normally, when we get too deep into the first fight, we forget the second fight, which is much more essential. So I believe that would capture our challenge today. I'll leave it there, and if you're interested, again, I invite you to read especially Capital Redefine and the Wellbeing, and also invite you to, if you haven't been familiar with NENA, make yourself familiar with NENA and the great work that goes in there. Thank you so much for your patience. I'm
Thank
done, I
you.
believe.
Thank you, Hamed. If people know how to press emojis, please do press the clap button or something similar. Hamed, we do have a number of questions that have come through, and Tiani and I have been trying to collate some of them together. So let's make a start. We will finish on time at 1:30, so please bear with us. We'll work through the questions as quickly as we can. Hamed, just to sort of kick off a mini summary from you, Miguel has asked, how does your research fit into the broader post-capitalist debate? Can you?
Yeah. Post-capitalist, yeah. Well, in many different ways, and one is just the empirical part that you just presented a bit of that. I'm very much interested in understanding who is who and what are they doing. People out there that would push for post-capitalist ways of living. So that's the practical, empirical aspect of it. And I also get a little bit too philosophical and too deep in sometimes in order to look into, for instance, the nature and future and a structure of capitalism, because capitalism has evolved since Karl Marx wrote the book Das Kapital, right? So that's one of my aims has been actually to imagine if Karl Marx was still alive, how would have been dealing with the complexities of modern capitalism in our time. And I see that there's some elements he would keep, and then in other elements he would, in other aspects he would go beyond. So that's why in one of the chapters in that book, the title is Going Beyond Marx, but with Marx. So I think it's still interesting stuff in there. And I try to provide people with kind of a conceptual framework that would bring people together, feminist and socialist and anarchist. I hope the work would resonate with them.
That actually touches on the next question. What do you hope personally will come from this research? What are you hoping that civil society or other groups will learn from it or do with it?
I think our job intellectually is to provide them with the image. It's like, taking a picture of them. I know research is subjective. There's a bit of our subjectivity into that image. It's like every lens is like that. And put it in front of them so they would see each other, they would see themselves, where they are located. For instance, if you go to those network analysis or network websites, you can click on each node, find your organizations and see how you're connected with others. What are the commonalities you have, common things, what are the values that you share, what are the ideologies, what are the perspectives, learn from each other, find each other. Maybe that would pave the way for becoming more involved in some joint projects and things like that. So that's what I hope that would achieve. But the real work is the one that people like, in NENA do. They're like, as I said, like honeybees, cross-fertilization, network weaving. We need that layer, that meta activist, meta ideological level. Even if you have your own ideology, that's fine. That's fine. But still, you need to accommodate for others. You need to help others to work across their differences. See how the far right does the job. I mean, it's in the nasty way. It's in the nasty way. But they bring people under one umbrella. But we can do it, I think, for much more progressive outcomes, hopefully.
Thank you, Hamed. That actually links to 3 questions that have come through. 2 people, I don't know if they meant to, but they sent me private questions, so they're not visible there. And then one person, this question is in the mix there. So you were just talking about how, we need to do it like the right-wing groups who have forged together, and particularly through neoliberalism, I'm actually paraphrasing and adding, they were able to redesign the world in the late 80s, and that was picked up by politicians and such. One comment has been problem with progressives is they're all arguing about their own little pocket of work and they don't band together. The comment here by Claire is interesting. She says, too many views, fragmented movements towards a better society, not helpful when trying to counter the dominant capitalist ideology entrenched for 600 years. Don't we need more solidarity and an overarching goal? Otherwise, we may dither forever. Before you comment on that, Hamed, and while people are thinking, so all this fracturing, all these different objectives, all these different goals, someone else wrote privately to me, but I think they meant to comment to Claire. Actually, that's exactly how we're going to break down capitalism. Look at the global tapestry of alternatives. You'll see that the move is towards bioregionalism, localization, not fragmentation, but strength back in bioculturalism. So I think these are some really interesting views. From your research, given there are a lot of different views on how people would explain or describe themselves, do you think there's a strength or a weakness or a little of both in all of these differing views in progressive groups?
Oh, yeah, I think it's both. I mean, there are strengths in diversity, the weaknesses in lack of coordination and communication. I personally always considered myself as a leftist, and I run a course of the title is Future Societies, and I used to be the older title was Capitalist Globalization. It was so kind of gloomy. and people were learning a lot. The students were learning a lot, but when they were leaving the course, they were just very upset about everything. And then I realized, well, let's bring some conversation about the alternatives. So I allocated half of the second half of the semester to the alternatives, and basically I couldn't believe that there were so many of them actually, and there's so many great ideas that don't make headlines. And it was so educational. I'm still learning about them. I think when we are in our silos and thinking about a society too complex, too diverse, it's too overwhelming. I'm not going to get involved. I can't really digest that. Well, that would prevent us. But as soon as we open the windows and the doors and get involved, then we become more open-minded, and we learn a lot from others. And I think that's even activists themselves need to do that. And as you said, there are also ideas that are more I would say general, like bioregionalism. It's a kind of umbrella idea, umbrella framework that brings many views into conversation, into coordination with each other, and they are there. And I think diversity, I mean, biodiversity is the strength of nature, and also this ideological and practical diversity is the strength of us. But also nature is interconnected. Also, nature works together, every elements of it. It's a commons. That's why I try to push for the idea of commonism, not communism, commonism. Because if we learn from commons and how commons work, they work in unity but in diversity.
Thank you, Ahmed. Lots to think about, I think, for all of us. And certainly NENA, the New Economy Network Australia, the work of NENA has really shown, and we structured NENA to specifically allow for a lot of diversity in the kind of different kinds of work people do and the different worldviews. We never said we had to have a sort of singular view. We just wanted to bring diversity together. But it does wage this kind of conversation about, well, what's the end game and how are we getting there? Certainly after 35 years working across environmental, new economy, community, capacity, etc., decolonisation, I think diversity is the reality of life. And as you said, Hamed, nature works it very much. Nature loves diversity. She doesn't like the singular or the unilateral, but finding that common ground, supporting each other in our different approaches, and really getting specific about the kinds of specific reform we want, whilst supporting each other's diversity as perhaps the way we have that patchwork quilt rather than a singular nylon doona, if that makes sense as a terrible metaphor. Coming into that, let's go to the next question. Neil has said pro-sociality, defined as positive behaviours and beliefs, I'm paraphrasing, pro-sociality, getting communities to do good things, getting people to do good things. He has a question about that. In the context of the rapidly escalating polycrisis and the urgent imperative towards localization, do you have any ideas as to how pro-sociality can be promoted at the individual and community levels? That's the basics of the question, and then including intra and intergroup pro-social behaviour. And do you think demonetization and gift economy would influence it?
Yeah, I think yes, but I can't pretend that I know the answer, especially for pro-sociality. I think that needs to be clarified first. Yeah, but yeah, localization, those connections, they're great, but also we've got the globe as a locality as well. So we also need to look after the entire planet as a locality itself too. So and that would require expanding that sociality to across the communities, the relationships between communities. I'm sorry, I can't really pretend that I understand that concept very well, and I can answer that question. Yeah.
Okay. There's a couple of questions from Neville, and they're more about research methodology than the content of what you were talking about. One aspect of his question is, does the numbers and machine approach really demonstrate what the research is seeking as knowledge? I know many global philosophers, sociologists, etc., in the last 40 years who are still skeptical. There's still a better need for combined qualitative and quantitative research methods. Did you want to speak to that, Hamed?
Oh yes, our research project is a mixed method. What I presented was just just a tip of the iceberg of the quant aspect of it. We have interviewed, we're also looking for some more money and opportunities and support in order to go through the interviews that we have. They're beautiful interviews, but it's, as I said before, this is a small number. It was a pilot project. Only 96 people could manage to participate, and so I can't claim that I can generalize that to the entire Australian civil society, but it's a case study in itself. It was diverse enough to give us some view, as I presented, into the mindset of people and their experiences and actions.
Thank you, Hamed.
Absolutely, yeah.
Harry has asked a question. He asked it while you were on slide 22. What does that scale represent, e.g. 0.6 of what? You don't need to share screen, but would you like to refer back to that? It's a bar chart of pattern matrix or something.
Bar chart of pattern.
I may have that wrong, but if you want to check slide 22 and just remind us what the
22.
scale was.
The bar chart of pattern. Yes. Do you want me to explain that again?
Maybe if you can just speak to it very quickly.
Oh yes, the bar chart is it was a visualization of the a pattern matrix. The pattern matrix is one of the products of factor analysis that the statistical programs do. I just wanted to visualize it for you guys instead of going through those very boring and complex table of pattern matrix. When we do a factor analysis, as I said, the statistical program looks for correlation. So, for instance, if a few statements correlate with each other in terms of people's when they say I agree or disagree, they get a score, they get a number. And so when those numbers correlate across a few statements, the computer puts those statements together and says, well, I found a component here. I found the theme that underpins this group of statements. So that graph actually puts those groups of statements together, and you see it was color coded. For instance, down the bottom there were the dark blue ones, the ones with the dark blue bars, and together they were considered by the computer program as highly correlated together as one theme. And then you can see a statistics is not just about numbers. A lot of subjective and mental work goes into it. And so we sit back and look at the statements that are grouped together by the program and say, okay, well, it seems that this group of statements or this group of questions are pointing to this direction or that direction. They're telling us that there is kind of, for instance, autonomism going on here, or communalism going on here. And therefore, we, instead of dealing with 22 statements, we deal with only 5 dimensions, like job satisfaction, for instance. Like, so you have to come up with some questions that would you ask people about, their working conditions, their payments, their relationship with the management, or their relationship with their colleagues. How collegial are you? Satisfied with the collegiality of your work? And see that each one of them is a dimension of job satisfaction. I mean, social life is very multidimensional. Sorry to take that too much.
Did you speak to scale? I'm not sure if, did you answer the question on what the scale was in that?
Oh yeah, the scale was a group of statements, 22 statements we put together. We asked people to tell us, to look at each statement and tell us to what extent they think each statement represents their view of good quality of life. For instance, biodiversity, how important it is. And if you say it's very, very extremely important, you get the highest score for that.
Okay, thank you, Hamed. We don't have time for all the questions, but to wrap us up, because we're almost finished today, I might go to Sandy's question. What further research or work has been identified coming out of this research? I'd love to hear about what comes next.
Well, what comes next is we have to crunch more data That's my part of my job. There are other members that are more involved in the qualitative aspect of it, and it's for me it's very interesting to, for instance, because we measured a lot of things. For instance, what makes some people go for or favor the first component, the biodiversity, or go more ecocentric? What makes people go for community autonomy as their own favorite way of achieving good life? And then we look at for instance, their theory of change. For instance, those who favor more radical change or those who favor more systemic change, would they what sort of, or what aspect of good life good life they would favor as well? So my job is to look into the associations and find the determinants, things that make you more, I don't know, anarchistic, more socialistic, more comprehensive towards community, towards a good life. What influences, things that influences our views of good life.
Great. Thanks, Hamed. And I think the final question JP has asked, she starts with a quote from wonderful Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde famously defined a cynic as someone who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. How do you see our global society getting past the cynicism that seems to prevail in modernity? Trust seems to be tenuous now with all the fakery that is possible through our digital lives.
Yeah, okay, that's a big question, isn't it? Okay, yeah. I think we can spend many hours talking about that.
Well, you have 2 minutes.
Okay. Well, I think Gramsci said the pessimism of intellect and optimism of will. Willfully, I'm optimistic, although intellectually I share that with JP, and I'm very pessimistic in that sense. But that's all what we have in 2 minutes. I mean, 1 minute.
Well, and I was just going to say that I think throughout all of it, the concepts of localization, bioregionalism, making it real by being out there in the world with other people in whatever way possible. That's how trust is built.
Yes.
Because let's hope we can still trust what we see and feel when we garden or talk to people or interact over the small transactions of life. So I think keeping it real, definitely, as I said before, the NENA approach has always been, how do we weave those conversations and connections as best we can in a very fragmented and often confusing world. But I think there's some amazing initiatives going on, and certainly Hamed's research has shown how some groups are seeing themselves and seeing the work that they do, and I think that's pretty terrific. So in the spirit of good trust and finishing on time, we're just about to roll into 1:30. Thank you everyone for your time and attention today. We're really grateful to you for joining us. The recording for this will be available shortly. No promises on how rapidly that will be turned around. But Hamed has shared very generously in there the references and such. Huge thank you to Tiana for helping keep track of questions and popping in those links. And yeah, a final big thank you to Hamed. Hamed and I have been working together on and off. I've been the NENA contact for his research, and it's been an absolute delight to be working with Hamed and seeing where all this research will take us. So I'm looking forward to seeing further outcomes over time. And wherever NENA as a humble civil society network can support your work, that would be terrific. And to everyone who hasn't been a member in the past, please do think about joining NENA. Again, we are a small but humble network trying to do everything that Hamed's been talking about, bringing people together, finding those commonalities whilst still supporting and celebrating our differences. So yeah, on that note, a huge thank you to everyone, and we'll sign off now. Thank you, Hamed.
Oh, thank you, everyone. Thanks for being patient with me. All the best. See you again.
See you soon. Bye.